Welcome to Momentum Boost. I'm Adrienne Gold Davis. I'm the host of Momentum Boost, and I'm one of the trip leaders for Momentum. At Momentum, we're here to help you live your most meaningful life by connecting to Jewish values, by engaging with Israel, by taking action, and by fostering unity without uniformity. You know, one of Momentum's founding values is that we focus on what unites us and not what divides us, because labels disable. And we're not going to get into a conversation about politics today, but rather about the emotional backstory and lived experiences of Black Jewish mothers. So today, we'll explore part one of how to take action, this time by listening. You know, one of the most tragic moments of that excruciatingly painful video of George Floyd's final moments were his calls for his mother. Every mother who saw that clip felt it like an arrow to her guts, like a call to her soul, because even grown adult men still need their mothers when they're afraid or in pain. How did we get to a place where those calls were not heeded? How can we ensure a society where those calls don't need to be made? We understand that all mothers want safety and security for their children. But do Black mothers have a greater burden to carry? Our two guests today are Jewish mothers who are also women of color. Their experience with navigating these issues are just two of the voices we need to listen to, because the Torah teaches us tzedek, tzedek tirdof, justice, justice you shall pursue. And today is part of our efforts to listen and to understand in order to truly pursue the just. So let's get started. It's time for today's boost. And as always, if you have any questions of all, please just enter them in the Q&A box that Zoom will provide, and we will monitor it throughout the webinar. But for today, we are excited to welcome Michaella Etienne and Pina. Michaella Etienne is the founder of DiaKid, the Association of Parents of Children with Diabetes. She was born and raised in New Brunswick, Canada, and her cultural identities have placed her on stage to address issues about her experience being a minority within a minority group. A public speaker, spoken word performer, TV co-host, and a board member for nonprofit organizations, she takes pride and finds meaning in her biggest projects, building peace in her home with her husband and raising her 4 children. Now, Pina is a registered nurse and the mother of 3. She lives in Palm Beach County, Florida. She participated in the 2014 July Momentum trip to Israel, which she describes as one of the most life-changing experiences of her life. Despite being raised in a Southern Pentecostal family, she chose to return to her roots and converted to Judaism in 2013. She and her family have found their spiritual home at Temple Beth El of Boca Raton and are both active in the Jewish community at large. I'd like to welcome Dana and Michaella. Ladies.
Hello.
Hello, love.
Hello.
Hello. Hello. It's good to see you. Thank you so much for answering our call for information and for sharing today. But before we begin, let's just have a little nachas, a little Jewish pride. What's going on with your kids? Tell me what you've got, how many you got, where they're holding, and how you're feeling about them. We'll start with you, Dana, if that's okay.
Okay. So I have 3 children, as you mentioned. Caleb is my 18-year-old who just graduated in quarantine. So we watched his graduation online, but he's getting ready in September to go off to Carleton College, an amazing institution in Minnesota. So we're extremely proud of him. He's an amazing, just a wonderful kid. He's always been a scholar. He's my brain. So he's the brainchild. And then I have my 14-year-old who I kind of call a hippie. She's my mini me. And she's just, everything is rainbows and unicorns. And she's like the joy of my life, but like the artsy one. And then I have my 10-year-old daughter, Koi, who I call my love muffin because she still cuddles with me and she's still in that cute little mushy lovey phase. Yeah. Is just the sweetest, smartest kid. Everyone, everywhere you go, everyone like flocks to her. She's so lovable and so amazing. So I am extremely blessed. I have a wonderful 3.
Oh, beautiful. How about you, Michaella?
I am the mother of 4. I have a 13, 9, 5, and 2. We have a special family. 3 years ago, my daughter was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and it turned my children into caregivers.
Huh.
So we have a lot of music and a lot of dance to get us through moments. We've been flattening the curve for 3 years now, fighting type 1 diabetes on an hourly basis. Every hour for us is a gift. We are living on borrowed times, and we are elevating all our moments.
Wow. Wow. I've been following you closely as you write about that on Facebook and so on. You've become such a great advocate. So you both have incredible kids, not surprising. But right now I want to have a really honest conversation about what makes your experiences perhaps different than mine. I'd like you to both share, maybe one at a time, what's like as a Jew of color, as a Black woman, raising your children. How is it different for you, perhaps, than it is obviously for me? Let's begin again with you, Dana.
Okay. So first, within the Jewish community, being a Jew of color, my experience is obviously going to be different because if I walk into a synagogue, all the heads turn. There's obviously this otherness. I'm often asked immediately, when did you convert? Because the assumption is that I converted. Or, I've had a couple other run-ins that were less than courteous, that were obviously a result of my being the other. But just as a mother, as a Black mother, aside from my Jewishness, if you will, my concerns, my fears are very different than would be the fears of a white Jewish mother, because I am constantly concerned about my son specifically. And I know at this point, men and women, we've had problems in the Black community with both, but obviously Black men are seen as more of a threat and face more danger as it is. So I've constantly been concerned about my son's safety, and he's an amazing kid. He's never been called to the principal's office. I mean, this isn't a kid that hangs with the wrong crowd or is, getting in trouble, but his skin color makes him a target. His skin color makes him dangerous. So
what do you mean?
So to give you an example, most people that I know, most Black people that I know, at least in the United States, can track their first racist experience to around 1st or 2nd grade, myself included. For my son, I remember when he was about, and I was telling this story before, saying that he was about 13, and I was corrected by my son and my ex-husband. He was actually about 9 or 10 when this happened, but he was walking a friend home down the street and was stopped by a sheriff's officer who asked him, "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" Because apparently he didn't look like he belonged in the neighborhood we had lived in for 10 years. And he didn't recognize that. Of course, as a kid, he didn't recognize that as racially motivated. We knew immediately what it was when he told us what happened. And that was when I realized that he wasn't just a cute little kid anymore. He was now a Black man at 10 years old. So those kinds of things, having to realize, okay, now's the time we need to have the talk with him, because those are talks I have to have that I would imagine white Jewish mothers don't have to have with their children about what to do if you're stopped by the police or how to know when you're in an unsafe situation. And walking around with that fear, wanting to give your child the best and teach them values of Judaism, like forgiveness and love and justice, but having them see so much injustice in the world and trying to reconcile that as a mother when I'm teaching them these things. Kind of makes it a unique experience, to say the least.
Dana, I would like to unpack this. After Michaella speaks, we'll go back and forth, you guys, and we'll take the micro and the macro and unpack it. But I'd be curious, and so if you would think about this for after, when did your son stop being a cute kid, and when did he become this dangerous man? How does that transform? When? How? And is that typical? So if you could think about that for after. And now, Michaella, the same question for you. How is your experience different, say, than mine?
I remember the first time I was asked why my skin tone was the skin tone that it was. It was probably summertime, and a little girl came up to me and she said, remember, I was born and raised in New Brunswick, so there was no cultural diversity.
Right.
I was asked why I was brown, and I answered because I'm Jewish.
Oh my gosh, how fabulous.
And you know, everybody has a story and everybody has this history, and I have a lot of baggage. You know, my parents did something incredible back in the 70s. The daughter of a rabbi, an Orthodox rabbi, married a Haitian convert, a human activist, a political exiled. And what does it do to children, children who come from a mixed background? It adds layers, and those layers are I would say the ability to connect, right? The ability to connect with memory and recollection. And what does it do for a family like ours? It adds the possibility to really feel what others feel in our comfort zone, right? So the Seder experience with my father was really real. You know, when he talked about slavery, Jews being slaves. And I remember any guest at our table, their throat would start to, you know, to hurt. And when my late father passed away, the Seder became just one big song, like, you know, just one big song. And that was my main concern with my kids, like losing that connection. Like we were once slaves, you know, it was us. And my children completely being oblivious, you know, up until 4 weeks ago, we were all oblivious to the emergency of tackling racial inequalities, systematic racism. We were all oblivious. We were on hold with our pleasures, with our comfort, with our routine, I included. And having all these identities is always an opportunity to say, we can't close our eyes on this one. It was once us, it is now us. And like you said in your introduction, a human lost his life in front of a camera in real time.
Right.
I do not monitor on a constant basis what my children are consuming on the internet. But as moms, I'm sure that children have seen this video. And we have to have a conversation about the loss of life.
Right.
You know, life is a whole entire world in itself.
Of course.
And we can't just click on another link and pretend, you know, it's entertainment.
Right. You know, Michaela, Dina just said a moment ago, or you just said a moment ago that up until this last couple of weeks, it hasn't been on the top of your radar. But Dana, I've heard you say that this is not something new at all. What you're feeling in the last couple of weeks has always been there. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. So from the time that my son was young, and I'm talking toddler, elementary school, I knew that he was cute then, but he was going to one day be a Black man. And George Floyd's murder, unfortunately, was not the first of its kind. So I kind of had a little heads up that this is a pattern, because I see what happened is no different than what happened with Emmett Till. So this has been happening.
Please fill in our listeners about Emmett Till.
So Emmett Till was a young man during the time around the civil rights movement and all that, who was accused of whistling at a white woman. He was 14. He was from Chicago, I want to say, and was down in Mississippi visiting family for the summer. Was accused of whistling at a white woman, and his body was found. He had been beaten and thrown into a river. Okay. The mother chose to have the funeral open casket so that the world could see. So she said, so the world could see what they did to my baby. And that was a huge turning point in the civil rights movement, when people were actually able to see what happened, which is one reason that I think this, the murder of George Floyd has been such a tipping point and hopefully a catalyst for finally making significant changes, that people were able to see it. As Michaella said, like, you're watching, I have chosen not to watch the video, and I won't watch it. What has been described to me about the video is enough for me. I don't need to witness it. But this has been a problem, and it's been something that I've been concerned about for years. As I said a few minutes ago, my son was 9 or 10 the first time he was approached by a police officer. So I didn't have the luxury of going about my life as if there were no problems. I knew there were. I have faced racism myself with police officers. I've been on road trips and scared to pull over, or hoping that, you know, a tire didn't blow out, because that could turn into something as well. So this was not new for me. And having a child who, and my son, as I said, was cute and chubby and always had long braids and brilliant, and everybody loved him. But there is a point where you switch from being a cute little Black kid to now being a Black man. And now my son is taller than me, and he looks like a grown man. Facial hair, he just looks like a grown man. So there's always this fear in my gut. There's this, you know, he's 18, he's a man, he should be able to go out and, you know, do things. And every time he leaves the house, I'm terrified.
Oh, Dana.
So I've looked at pictures, and we've discussed this before, but I've been flipping through his pictures before, and tried to think to myself, which of these pictures would be the one I would send in to the news station if he was next. So it's, you know, it's a lot, and it doesn't go away, and it won't go away until this changes. Because as a mother, so I used to be a home health nurse, and most of my patients were elderly. And I had a patient that was 99 years old. She lived in the same assisted living facility with her son, who was 70 something. And she was still fussing at him when she didn't see him at breakfast in the morning. So it doesn't end. I was like, are you, so she was like, I shouldn't still have to mother him, but it never goes away. And her son was 70 something. So I don't expect that this will go away until the world changes. It's something that I just have to live with, but no mother should have to constantly be in fear for their child's life. And this is what the reality is right now.
I'll say. Now, Michaella, can you speak to that from your experience, which may be very different than just living in the Southern United States?
There is an experience that is absolutely the same. I mean, when one hears about systematic racism, nobody can avoid it. It starts at birth, and it follows you throughout your life. My daughter had a beaming smile yesterday because she says, Mom, the protests are working, they're working. And she's been following everything on Instagram. And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, now we can speak up. And I thought that was really powerful, because what does it mean to be on the other side? You know, I have layers. I'm a Jew of color. It means that all my life, I had nowhere to talk and speak up about any injustice, about any discrimination. About
Did you ever try? Did you ever try? And were you?
I've been told I have a chip on my shoulder. I've been told that I've got to give people the benefit of the doubt. And I've heard that expression, chip on the shoulder, chip on the shoulder, chip on the shoulder. And, you know, you're blamed and you're shamed when people are espousing ideologies that are not coming from Judaism.
Give me an example of what you mean.
Well, our foundations is not based on a God that has a color. And we do not have a hierarchy of colors, and we do not have a supremacy of colors. So there's not a better Jew or not a better Jew because of this, you know, the color of your skin. Now, it can come to matchmaking. Right? Since when is the color of skin an identifier to choose a good mate or not a good mate? And we have a lot of conversations to have with our parents, with our grandparents. You know, what were your beliefs? You know, when we step into a Jewish space, it can be a synagogue, it can be a community, it can be any type of groups, schools. And we do not see any diversity, people of color. We have to question ourselves, why is this happening? Because statistically, there's 15 to 20% of Jews of color. We have to question ourselves, were they, shooed away? Were they blocked from entering? Were they made that feel uncomfortable? Because it's not normal that any space, any Jewish space, doesn't have diversity. And we have to question ourselves and our friendships. It's nothing to be proud about living in an all-white neighborhood. And that's a term that's very controversial in my family. I'm not allowed to call my mother white. My mother is white presenting. She is Ashkenazi, half Hungarian, half Polish, but she's certainly not white. So I'm not allowed to say that to my mother. It's very insulting to her. But to feel that we've arrived in life because we live in all white or all North American communities is absolutely wrong. Those are not Jewish values. They're white supremacist values. And if your social circle lacks diversity, you have to ask yourself the question, what is happening here?
Absolutely.
Wow. Dana, you said something, I'm sorry to skip back to this for a minute, but it's been bugging me since you said it. You said you had to have with Caleb, with your son, the talk.
Mm-hmm.
What's the talk?
The talk is a talk that every Black family has to have with their children at some point, where you explain racism and you explain you are different. The rules are different for you. If you're at the mall with your friends and they decide to go in this store after school and they've got their backpacks, you're not walking into a store with a backpack because you will be assumed to be stealing and you will be followed. And the rules are different. And if your friend steals, he may get a slap on the wrist. If you steal, they're going to charge you as an adult and throw your butt in jail. And this was middle school, 10 years old, 11. So coming out of elementary school into middle school when we first really had the talk. Your friends can run down the street and do such and such, and it's boys will be boys and they're just rowdy. If you are running down the street making noise, they're going to assume you just ran out of somebody's house that you robbed. The rules are different. And my ex-husband had this talk with him. He's had a gun pulled on him by a police officer when he wasn't doing anything wrong. He had his own personal experiences with racism. So these were very real conversations we have to have. We have to say, you don't talk until we're present and we get you a lawyer. Don't say a word. You can't, because they'll flip it and twist it. There are rules that are different for our children. If you ever get, now that he's driving, if you ever get pulled over, 10 and 2, your hands stay up here. You don't reach for anything. You don't turn your head. Yes, sir. No, sir. You answer the question. These are things, there's not, and at this point, I almost feel like that talk is kind of irrelevant, because to say, okay, well, if you get pulled over, make sure you don't move your hands and blah, blah, blah. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to end up shot. We've seen. So you don't have to be resisting, and you don't have to be rowdy, and you don't have to be legitimately doing something wrong to end up dead. That's a talk we have to have with our children when they're young. And I don't know any Black parents that have not had to sit down at some point and say, listen, you need to understand that we live by a different set of rules. I don't care what Susie can do. I don't care what Johnny can do. You can't do that.
Oh, it seems to steal their childhood. Michaella, has that been your experience? Did you have to have the talk with your children?
Well, you just said a statement that is very, very important, is that, that line, when do they stop being cute and they become a menace or an aggression? It's very hard for, white presenting Jewish parents who adopt, for instance. They have these gorgeous, cute kids. They have so much attention, and suddenly they become a threat. And you'll hear that from Jews of colors, in a situation like my mother, their kids were cute until they became a threat. There is a racial bias, and it is to view people of color, Black people, children, as adults.
How do you mean? What do you mean?
A different set of perceptions. So it means that my 13-year-old daughter, the expectations of her, the expectation of an adult, not a teenager.
Right.
When she was 10 years old, it was not the expectation of a child. It was the expectation of an adult. And the same goes to 8. I'm not sure when that transition goes, but when there are testimonies of these horrific things that are happening to children, you're thinking, they're just children. They're just children, but that's where racial bias and racism comes in, is that we perceive children as adults, and they have sanction as adults, are spoken to as adults, and have these consequences as adults, while their youth are being, yes, robbed. Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm going to have to ask you both a question from our audience right now, because this chat is blowing up. So, and I've got my own questions, but we'll start with this one. This is from Jen. I'm a white Jewish mother of Black daughter. I adopted her from Ethiopia as an infant. I have so many questions about how to address the microaggressions and racisms that my 9-year-old and her Black friends already experience. Example, your skin looks like poop. However, I'm going to ask questions about being Black in a predominantly white Jewish community. I want my daughter to feel comfortable in all Jewish settings, shul, camp, Jewish programs. However, more often than not, she's the only person of color in the room. She's already expressed to me that she doesn't want to be Jewish, and I'm afraid that it represents another other experience for her. Is this something you have addressed within your own families? Michaela, I'll let you go at that one first.
So, you know, my fears right now are not a corporal fear for my children's lives. Okay, my daughter can go scooting down the street, and there's no dangers in that. However, let's be clear, we live in Montreal, and in this climate, no, I do not trust that she could be safe. Something very important, and Jennifer, thank you for your question, and thank you for choosing motherhood. There's so many definitions of motherhoods, and adoption, especially when you're adopting outside of your community, you can be the center of so much aggression, questioning your intention, from even going outside of your skin tone, which is horrible. I do have that conversation with my children all the time. My biggest fear is for my children to decide that based on the landscape of Judaism, that there's no space for them. There is no refuge. Now, my refuge, I have 2 refuges. My refuge is my synagogue. It's the place of prayer. That refuge with my late father's refuge, that refuge is my mother's refuge. You know, my mother is the daughter of an Orthodox rabbi who worked throughout the Holocaust alongside my grandmother. So my mother spent her entire childhood hearing survivors from the Shoah. Okay, so for my mother, assimilation was not an option, And we had the blessing of the burden put on us, my brother and I, that leaving Judaism was not an option. But when I see the landscape of our communities, our leadership, our structures, and I'm seeing what our children have at the tip of their fingers, I'm thinking, what is going to keep them in? Now, this is not just a Jew of color problem. It is our problems, because if we as Jews of color, this minority, we're feeling it already, it is just a foreshadowing for the rest of the communities. It's just a foreshadowing, right? Because we just see it first, and we just see it faster. But that ability for our children to say, you know what, there's no meaning in these communities anymore, because it's just social, it's just pleasure, we're just consuming, we're just among ourselves. Well, you know what? There's more meaning and fulfillment outside the world. So it's very important that, Jennifer, you as a mom, you fulfill that space for your child. You feed that space for your child.
So let me ask you something. What does that mean? I'm going to ask you, Michaela, to continue, and then Dana, I'm going to ask you, what does it mean to fulfill the space of sustaining spiritual depth, wisdom, and Jewish values, while also ensuring that we're not in isolationist societies, and how do we get our children to see a broader world and to navigate their lives through a Jewish lens while not turning away from what requires justice? Yeah.
Yes. First of all, as moms, we have to advocate for our children. You know,
Right.
I have a child with special needs. I need to be her advocate. And it's not easy to be an advocate for a child with special needs, especially when there's so much stigma on a disease on my child, right? And the same is true with racism and discrimination. There's so much stigma. Oh, you're exaggerating. Oh, I'm not racist. Oh, it was just a joke. Oh, it was, no. No means no. So there are steps that Jennifer needs to take with her social circle. There are people that she will need to eliminate, because you know what? If you're not ready to progress, if you're not able to respect my daughter's essence, then I'm sorry, this friendship is no longer, you know? So as moms, we have to take care of our domain. Our domain is our bodies, our families, our children. We can give somebody the benefit of the doubt. We can give a chance. We can educate. We can bring awareness. But there's a limit. If somebody's essence is being compromised, then, you know, in our case, the relationships are over.
Wow. Dana?
So I have been very, very blessed that the only synagogue we've belonged to since our conversion in 2013 is Temple Bethel of Boca Raton. And from before our conversion, from the first Shabbat service when we were visiting, we have been treated like family. I have not had any experiences within my actual community where I felt uncomfortable. Now in other Jewish spaces outside of my synagogue I have, but the blessing in that is that my children haven't experienced that. I'm usually the one that branches out and goes to all these other talks and, you know, services and whatever. But in my community, my children have been very welcomed. We haven't had any issues with them feeling left out or feeling like they were looked at funny or not included in things. They have very good friends that are at synagogue. They, you know, we haven't had that problem in our close space. Now, I know that that is a problem in the bigger Jewish arena because I have experienced it. And what I explained to my children is that, so when we converted, I had this talk with my kids about marrying a Jewish person. Because, you know, we went through a lot to get here. Like, you can't go back in one generation. Like, we had to work to do this. So we've had those talks with them, and I've explained to them how important that is to me. I also understand, though, that because, see, I've heard people say, you know, I'm a Jew first and then blah, blah, blah. I don't have the luxury of being that, because whatever room I walk into, I'm a Black woman first. That's how I'm experienced by the world. So I don't have the luxury of saying I'm a Jew first and then, because most people don't know I'm Jewish until I tell them anyway. They assume I'm Christian because I'm Black and I live in America. So, but with my children, I've had to explain to them that that's important, but also needing to understand, especially in the climate the way it is now, that they may say at some point, I relate better to another Black person that understands my life. I relate better to a person who is not Jewish, but maybe just respects my Judaism or whatever. And I don't know what I would be able to say to that, because it is a very different experience, in trying to explain your life, live your life, relay the experiences of your life to someone who lives a very different reality can be difficult, and that can be really challenging. For a mother who has a child of color and doesn't really know how to navigate that, I totally agree with Michaella that you need to look at your social circle, and not just, are there people that are being offensive to my child, but do I have any diversity in my circle? If everybody in your world, and Michaella, we talked about this the other day, if everybody in your world looks like you, there's a problem. Statistically speaking, there are enough of us that we should be sprinkled in somewhere. If your whole circle looks like you need to look at whether or not that's intentional. And as a mother, as a Jewish mother, when we are teaching our children these values and we're trying to explain to them what Judaism is about and what Judaism is, we need to be modeling that behavior. So saying, do this, do this, do this, this is how you treat people, we're all God's children. However, we only associate with God's children that look like us. That's a problem.
You have to go out and look for it? Do you have to go out and find it? What if you're living in, you know, an environment where it just isn't there? Can you actively go out and look for it?
Absolutely. So I'm coming back to Jennifer. Your daughter is 9 years old, but these are steps, and anyone who's well-intentioned and wants to be an ally, you can all do this, right? Your children are going to school. School year is going to start. There's no reason that any child should not have the Crayola, the new improved Crayola with all the color hues in their color wheels, right? Because let me tell you, when you are in kindergarten and your teacher says, use this flesh color and use this black color, it feels like a knife, right? There you go, your identity is completely shattered, right? You can't identify with those two colors. So number one, school supplies, everyone, schools should make that mandatory. Number two, anything that relates to Judaica and curriculum, there needs to be a diversity representation. There is no way that baby Moses was white. It never happened and it never will. So we need to look at the curriculum and see that has a huge effect on children. So even if there's no social diversity, we have to prepare our children for it to be able to have real healthy relationships. So we're talking about school curriculum. We're talking about school administrators. Your staffing. What are your policies to hire and attract diversity within your staff? And if you can't retain them, what is happening in your classroom? Right? So we have staff. We have we have the school curriculum. We have, I have a beautiful friend of mine. She's a soul sister. She is a photographer. And she said to me, you know what, my website is really monochrome. Like everybody looks the same. They're all white presenting. What should I do? I love you, Mika. So I said to her, you know what? Go over to a beauty salon, a Black beauty salon, and pass along your card. Give some free sessions, right? There are possibilities to go outside of our bubbles, to shop in different neighborhoods. We have different needs, but we can expand our relationships slowly to show our children that you don't have to fear anyone who is of color. A person who is color is not a menace. A person of color is not an insect, right? Because that's what it goes down to, that perception that somebody could be inferior because they lack the money, they lack the education, or they were criminals. So that's what happens to criminals. No, we can start from the basics.
And can I just jump in real quick, Adrienne, on that? A couple of other things that I was thinking about, and I've had this conversation recently with another mother, that first of all, there are organizations specifically for Jews of color that you can reach out to and you can get your daughter involved with. There are summer camps specifically for Jews of color. So there are activities, there are weekend programs, there are trips, there is a community of people within the Jewish community where your daughter will be around people that look like her. So there are opportunities for you to seek out those types of things. But additionally, I pose this question to people because it sounds like, oh, well, I have to go outside of my comfort zone to find, like I should be seeking that out. And here's what I ask. If you found yourself for some reason living in an all Black neighborhood, how hard would you try to go out of that neighborhood to find people that look like you? Would you then know how to go outside of your neighborhood to find people to connect with that you felt comfortable with? And if you're willing and able to do it in that scenario, there's no reason you can't be willing and able to do it in the scenario you're in now.
Wow. There are so many questions. I think I'm going to give you one last question. We could probably go on for hours, and God willing, we'll have a chance to deepen this at another time. Okay, so are there any books, blogs, I'm reading off the chat now, podcasts that we can educate ourselves with for those of us who would like to understand the experience of Jewish people of color? Any thoughts? Anything jump to mind? Another question is, what would you like our talk to sound like with our white presenting children to help them understand what they need to do to help keep their Black friends safe? And this is, I think, the final one, and I'll let you both answer it. What do you wish every Jewish parent would say to their children? Dana first, and since you began, Michaella, you can end it. Okay, Dana, what do you wish every Jewish parent would say to their children?
Okay, so let me tell you why I'm in conflict with this question a little bit, because let me say this, I'm going to redefine the question.
Okay.
I think what you're saying to your children has more to do with your behavior than your words.
Huh.
So start there. I don't think a talk with your children is the most effective way of saying to them, this is how we as Jews treat people, this is how we as Jews believe. I think you're saying it through modeling your behavior. So the first thing that I would say is to take, I was writing something the other day and I put it this way: this is an opportunity for all of us to take the light of Torah and shine it to our hearts to reveal some of the darkness that we have. I think this is an incredible opportunity and a responsibility for us all to really do some introspection and turn inward and really allow God to show us where we're lacking and where our prejudices and biases are. And I think when we do that internal work, you will be saying to your children by your behavior, this is how we treat people. This is how we don't treat people. These are the jokes we make and these are the ones that we don't. And when you speak up in a moment when something is inappropriate and say, that's not what we believe. This is not how we treat people. And in your behavior, you say, listen, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're not going to do. These are people that if we believe that we're all God's children, if we believe that we are Jews to be a light to the nation, how does the light get to decide which people you want to be a light for?
Huh.
Either we believe it or we don't. I mean, there's a real internal conversation we need to have before we have a conversation with anyone else. And I think that would translate into what you're saying to your children. Now, if we want to have a talk, because we just want to have a talk, then I think it's really important to explain, to be honest in that talk and say, you know what? Some things have been brought to my attention and I've seen some of my own stuff that hasn't been quite right. So we're about to reset.
Nice.
We're going to push the reset button, and we as a family together are going to walk through making some changes to our lives so that we more accurately reflect the light of Torah, because this is what we believe. So we may be doing things differently. We may be befriending different people. We may be going different places. That's all a part of our process. And I believe that this will be getting us closer to, in our relationship with God. I think this is what, based on our beliefs, this is what God would have us to do. And anything contrary to that, call it out. Immediately call it out. Don't laugh about it. Don't, poo-poo it away. Say, no, wait, okay, let's stop here. Let's use this as a teachable moment. And I think doing those, first the inner work and then having those conversations and making it deliberate. Don't try to sneak it in on them. Don't just accidentally show up at a Target that has a lot of Black people one day. Say, no, this is a deliberate decision we're making. We are resetting this family. And this is how we're going to proceed from here on out. And I think that conversation would go a long way, coupled with you modeling what you're saying you now believe.
That was spectacular. Michaella, what would you like to add to that?
There's so many honest questions and honest curiosity, and we'll reach out at another time in another talk. Jews of colors have a very diverse and rich history, from Ugandan to Korean to Chinese to mixed marriages and adoption. I mean, Jews of colors, it's a very rich topic in itself. Okay, but essentially, moms are leaders, okay? And motherhood, I've discovered with a child with a special need that it's a choice, okay? We choose to parent, we choose our parenting styles. And in this narrative, for me, it's to go back, a few thousand years. And, my late father chose his name. My late father was Moshe. He chose Moses' name, right, as a convert. And when my father sought refuge in Canada, he was a political exile. He made a choice in his own leadership, right? His life was no longer at risk of being executed. And his journey to Judaism, which he always had a connection to, was connected to Moses. Moses was a prince. Moses was comfortable. He was royalty. And in that moment, he heard his own people calling him. He chose to leave that comfort.
Mhm.
And to have that, all those, I mean, he chose aggression, right? We know that story, but he chose to embrace that feeling of being connected to another human that is suffering.
Mhm.
And our lives as mothers will never, ever be fulfilled if we think it only has to do with things that make us feel good. If we go into the meaningful, if we have those deep conversations that our kids can handle,
Mhm.
then we will be better within ourselves. In this fight for justice, there's so many politics being played, and it's hard to go and navigate and pick political parties and news outlets. But if we choose humanity, which is what we are all about, Jewish mothers, it's very clear what choice we have to make. No more discrimination. No, under every single ground. And we have to connect. This platform is a beautiful platform. This platform is, if you want to encourage a platform, encourage this one that takes you as a mother and boosts your motherhood.